Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into one of the most immense, dramatic events in our planet's entire history. We're going to trace the slow-motion story of just unimaginable power, the epic journey of the Indian Plate. It's essentially a geological road trip that literally transformed the face of the Earth as we know it. To kick things off, I want you to consider this for a second. How exactly did a piece of land that started its life nestled all the way down against ancient Africa and Antarctica end up building the Himalayas? I mean, we're talking about the highest mountains in the world here. It sounds like a total geographical glitch, right? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight, and the actual mechanics of how it got to its final destination are just absolutely fascinating. All right, Section 1, Leaving Gondwana Behind. To really understand this immense shift, we gotta hit rewind. We're going back about 140 million years to set the stage for this trip. So, 140 million years ago, if you looked at a map of the Earth, you virtually wouldn't even recognize it. The Indian Plate was firmly locked into this ancient supercontinent called Gondwana. It was structurally stitched right together with what we now call modern Africa, Australia, Antarctica, and South America, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. But, the Earth's crust is restless. Eventually, thanks to some immense tectonic forces, this massive supercontinent just began tearing itself apart. Let's look at the timeline of that breakup. At 140 million years ago, like we said, India is firmly rooted. But fast forward a bit to 100 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period, and the Indian Plate breaks away, taking Madagascar with it. Shortly after that, it actually splits from Madagascar entirely, becoming this totally solitary landmass that geologists call insular India. From there, it begins this massive solo voyage northward. By about 55 million years ago, the very first stages of its collision with Asia kick off, which eventually culminates in a massive hard collision around 25 million years ago. But honestly, it's that interval, the time between the breakaway and the final crash, where the dynamics get truly wild. Moving into Section 2, the Great Northern Race. And race is definitely the right word, because once the Indian Plate cut ties with Madagascar, it didn't just casually float across the prehistoric ocean. It sprinted. Okay, so in the world of plate tectonics, land masses typically creep along at just a few centimeters a year. But the Indian Plate, it hit an astonishing speed of 20 centimeters per year. Now, that might not sound like much in our everyday lives, but in geological terms, that is a blazing pace. It's an absolute sprint. It ended up covering a huge distance of up to 3,000 kilometers, and it moved faster than any other known tectonic plate in Earth's history. So you're probably wondering, why did this specific plate manage to move so incredibly fast? Well, back in 2007, German geologists proposed a pretty compelling theory, and it all comes down to the plate's thickness. See, while the other plates that made up Gondwana have these really deep lithospheric roots, making them about 180 to 300 kilometers thick, the Indian Plate is only about 100 kilometers thick. It's basically half the thickness of its peers. The theory goes that a mantle plume, which is this huge upwelling of abnormally hot rock deep inside the Earth, actually melted off the lower part of the Indian subcontinent. It essentially torched its deep anchor, freeing it up to just surf northward at this crazy high velocity. But hey, science is a process of constant refinement, right? So on one side of this debate, we have that 2007 plume push hypothesis, arguing that the melted base caused the rapid acceleration. But then, fast forward to 2020, and geologists at Oxford and the Alfred Wegener Institute brought some new data to the table that completely challenges this. They argue that this extreme speed was actually an illusion. They believe it was caused by large errors in how we date geomagnetic reversals during that era. According to their newer research, once you recalibrate the timeline, that sudden dramatic acceleration just completely disappears. It's really a perfect example of how dynamic and constantly self-correcting geology is today. Regardless of exactly how fast it was moving, though, this northward journey had some massive global consequences. As the Indian Plate passed over deep Earth hotspots, specifically the ones that created the gigantic volcanic formations we call the Deccan Traps, it triggered colossal eruptions. We're talking massive, massive amounts of volcanic gases being released into the atmosphere. In fact, this passage may have actually contributed to the famous Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction event. So yeah, this moving plate was actively altering the Earth's global climate on its way north. Which brings us to Section 3, the Himalayan collision. After millions of years drifting across that prehistoric ocean, insular India finally runs out of room. It is time to hit the Eurasian Plate. Now, this collision was incredibly complex. It wasn't just a simple fender bender. Paleomagnetic data from 2012 helped scientists propose this double crash scenario to solve a major geological riddle. See, the amount of crustal shortening in the Himalayas just didn't quite match the sheer scale of the convergence between India and Asia. To explain this, they proposed 3 steps. Step 1. A piece of northern Gondwana broke off India early on, acting as kind of an advance guard, and made a soft collision with Asia around 50 million years ago. Step 2. The ocean basin between that fragment and the main Indian plate subducted, basically sliding underneath. And finally, step 3, the hard collision happened around 25 million years ago, when the massive bulk of the main Indian plate finally slammed into Asia. But actually, just like the debate over the plate's speed, this double crash theory has its challengers too. In 2019, some new paleomagnetic results gathered from southern Tibet pushed back against this greater Indian Ocean basin hypothesis. This newer data doesn't quite support the 2-stage dual collision model. So the debate is very much alive right now in the geological community. It's a great reminder that when you're trying to piece together a 50-million-year-old tectonic puzzle, you have to constantly update your ideas as new rock records are analyzed. Whatever the exact sequence of the crash was, though, the physical result was just spectacularly violent. I love how researchers vividly describe it. They say the sediment bunched up like earth before a plow. Can you picture that? Looking at the deeper mechanics of how these mountains formed, the incredible compressive force of that dense Indian plate driving into Eurasia literally folded the Earth's lithosphere. This extreme pressure triggered massive orogenic uplift, forcing just unimaginable amounts of rock and sediment high up into the sky. And that is exactly what created the vast Tibetan Plateau and the soaring peaks of the Himalayas. And that leads right into section 4. Mountains still on the move. Because we tend to think of mountains as these totally static, permanent fixtures of the landscape, right? But this epic journey is far from over. If you go stand in the Himalayas today, you are literally standing on an active collision zone. The Indian plate is currently still driving northeast at a rate of 5 centimeters per year. Meanwhile, the Eurasian plate is also moving north, but a bit slower, at just 2 centimeters per year. Because India is basically rear-ending Eurasia at a faster speed, the Eurasian plate is actively deforming. As a result, the Indian plate itself is compressing by 4 millimeters every single year. The Earth's crust is literally shrinking right there. The mountains are alive, they're still grinding, and they are still being pushed upward by this eternal crash. Which leaves us with this final, truly spectacular thought to ponder. As the Eurasian plate continues to deform and the Indian plate continues this relentless, unstoppable push northward, what on earth is the map of the world going to look like in another 50 million years? The continents as we know them today, they're really just a temporary snapshot in a multi-billion-year sequence. The Indian plate's epic journey proves that our world is incredibly dynamic, constantly changing, and driven by forces vastly larger than ourselves. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this today. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.